What actually made you want to work with addicted people? Because it's not something judges normally seek out.
That's correct. That's correct. I came to see that so many of the people in the criminal courts had substance abuse issues. They were using drugs. We had a lot of drug cases. And our traditional approach has always been to punish people. And we were punishing them when I was first a judge, punished a lot of people, giving them jail sentences or prison sentences. And what I saw over time was, which didn't take very long, it took a matter of months actually, to see that the people, regardless of what the sentence was, were right back. And it occurred to me that we weren't getting anywhere with this punishment cycle,
right?
Except we were overcrowding the jail. There was no question about that.
And people are going in and out.
Right, and they were coming right back, and they were looking at me like, I'm sorry. I mean, give me another chance. And the way the court system has worked for years is punishment escalates. So you start out with being on probation and told to pay a fine and maybe go to treatment. In those days, we didn't talk much about treatment, but mostly obey probation and don't get arrested again, and good luck. And that was the end of it. And then the next time around, it's, well, now you serve some time in jail. And then the next time around, you serve more time. And by the time you get to the fourth or fifth time, we're talking about very long sentences because we escalate up. Well, with drug offenders, the cycle of escalating up was becoming incredibly fast. Whereas with people who are charged with other offenses, auto theft, for example, they would get a sentence and you might not see them again forever or for a period of time. With drugs, I saw that you saw them again all the time. And then I found one day I was sentencing, and one of the people I was sentencing, he seemed to had a very odd name, but I'd heard the name before. Well, he was the brother of the person I had just sentenced the day before. Mm-hmm. And so it occurred to me then, when I knew nothing, that there was something going on here beyond just committing crimes. And so I got interested, and I looked into it, and I learned about treatment, and I learned about relapse, and I learned about addiction and substance abuse. And then I said to myself, we need to do something about this, because this is stupid what we're doing. And judges should not be stupid and do the same thing. Because I had read one of the sayings, I guess, at that time, it was mostly Alcoholics Anonymous, a little bit of Narcotics Anonymous, was insanity is doing the same thing again and again, always thinking you're going to get a different result and never getting it. Yeah. Always getting the same result. Well, that's sort of what we were doing in the courts. And so I decided that we needed to change all of that, and I spent the next maybe 5-6 years putting together with judges across the country were doing this. Well, I was not the only one. I mean, it's a national problem at that time. You know, we had cocaine and crack; those were the drugs then. And then, of course, we had PCP and LSD. And
when are you talking? Are you talking about the 1990s?
This is I've been a judge over 30 years, so this is way back.
Oh, way back.
In the late 70s, early 80s. It was very clear to me what was going on. But it took a long time to get the concept of substituting treatment for simply sentencing people and ignoring them. And then the concept of monitoring people. It took a long time to convince others to do that. And then we had to reach out and create some new system, which was what we call drug court, and we still do. And then I had to work very hard with the few other judges at that time, my dear friend Judge Terry, and a few other judges locally, very, very few, to get this started. Because there is resistance to change, as I will, as I always find with those who are addicted to drugs, great resistance to change. There's as much resistance in the courts as there is with
So
those
you've
who are
got
addicted.
resistance, but you
Right.
still were able to make it happen.
Right.
How was that?
Well, once I make up my mind, then I look at it this way. You know, this is an experiment. It's a pilot, and we're going to do it. And so I just set a date. I said, we're going to do it on this date. And I brought, we got together to a treatment at that time, which is very limited. And treatment was mostly voluntary at that time. Now it's about 90% court ordered. So, we've turned the system upside down of treatment, which I don't think treatment is terribly happy about, but because it's meant that those who want to get better and aren't in the criminal justice system are fighting for a place they can't get because somebody's already filled it. But what I saw was that this was worth doing, and so I fought and advocated, and we finally started. And once we started, we've never looked back. And now we dedicate, 5, 6, 7, 8, more than 10% of my bench of the judges in this county are working in treatment courts, because drugs and alcohol drive most of what we do in the courts. So in family law, you will find as much addiction as you will in criminal courts, in dependency where children are removed from their parents. Addiction drives this. And if you go to, just non-support, things you would think, well, okay, he doesn't pay child support. No, addiction is involved in every one of these areas, juvenile. Then you take mental health, which is the largest, fastest growing problem that we face in the courts. We're having the percentage and number of people who are mentally ill coming into our system is dramatically increasing. And the number that are coming from the juvenile system into the adult system is dramatically increasing. And if we sit back and do nothing about it, of course, we will continue another practice from the past that to me is unacceptable, and that is mentally ill people, particularly those who abuse drugs, will receive a disproportionately longer sentence nationally, the data shows it, research shows it, than the same person committing the same crime who's not mentally ill. That's all wrong. You see, that violates the fundamental principles that the courts are all about, that we're going to be fair, and we're going to look for justice, and we're going to treat people as individuals, and we're not going to lump them together and say because they're mentally ill, by definition, they're more dangerous, and therefore they should be all sent to jail for a longer period of time than people who aren't mentally ill. And if you add that they use drugs, then we know they'll keep reoffending. So we should even give them more time. See, and all of that drives the system into chaos. And I think it's one of the reasons that California has ended up with so many people in prison.
I work the steps around every issue in my life, particularly around my husband's suicide and raising the children on my own, certainly acknowledging that I'm powerless over that.
And I was the third kid in a family of 4 children, and it wasn't really an alcoholic family, but my dad was a rageaholic.
And the values that I got as a little boy is that lying works, even if you're in pain, don't tell anybody.
And we love recovery.
It is a privilege and a pleasure to be here to talk with you this morning. Many of you I have already discovered as I was walking in. I know from the past to the present. And it's so wonderful to see you all here and all sober. It's something that I often do not have the opportunity to see because I work with so many people that are struggling and have not reached the point of sobriety for any length of time. But what I would like to talk about this morning is what my view, and again these are my personal views, of what goes on in the courts, what we need to do, what we have not done well, and the changes we need to make, the changes we are making, and the results of those changes. And why it's so important that each and every one of you keep believing in what you're doing. Keep believing in recovery. Keep believing that people can get better. There's not a day of my life, if you come to my courtroom, every morning, every afternoon when I walk out, I always start out by saying virtually the same thing. It changes a little but not much. Most people who are in the courtroom, although they listen, don't get it. As one pointed out to me yesterday, he had finally gotten what I was saying. It had only taken 5 years, but that's all right. The message is always the same, and it does not disturb me, as you will see, that it takes 5 years. But my presentation is about what can the courts do to be a pathway to treatment and recovery. And the first issue is, you know, as the courts, we do a lot of things. We do family law, we do juvenile law, civil lawsuits, criminal is our biggest challenge. But we know one thing, and we've learned this, and although I don't think all judges recognize it, I certainly do, and that is that substance abuse, the use of drugs and alcohol, that's the heart of what goes wrong with our system for people. Why do we have so many customers? You know, if we were in a business, say, well, what brings the people here? Well, if you're going to ask me of all the things that bring people to the courts, it's substance abuse and mental illness. And how do we know that? If you look at the criminal courts, and that's what this slide is about, I hope you can see these. Many people think, well, you know, drug abuse, that's just people that use and possess drugs, and that's where they are, and forget. Well, there is a study that goes on nationally in our major cities, in our major jails, in which the federal government drug tests on a random basis, people being booked into jail. You're guaranteed the tests will not be used against you. No one objects, believe it or not. They're never used against anyone. But what it shows, the federal government and policymakers, the people that write laws and should be aware of what's going on in our country, is how many people are under the influence of drugs or alcohol when they commit a crime. So if you look at these crimes up here, we're not talking about drug use, we're talking about robbery, burglary, domestic violence, every crime that you can think of. Look at the percentages. Thank heaven San Jose is low. We have traditionally been low. But many times, cities such as the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., 80%, Chicago, often up at the 80%. And this just simply demonstrates that drugs drive our system. I mean, and if we don't recognize that as judges, and I often think we don't pay that much attention to it. The next thing we know is that mental illness, those with mental illness, are dramatically increasing in our jails and prisons and in our courts. Look at this chart that shows you over time. See, it's not a lot of years, from about the 70s, 80s up to today. If you look at those lines, and the red line is the one to look at because that's where things are going. We're going basically straight up. And pretty soon we'll be at 25%. That means 1 out of 4 people in jail or prison or charged with a crime will be mentally ill and have a diagnosable mental illness. Now, do any of those people use drugs? Yes. 90%. Okay? And I'm an expert on that. So you see these two things, and we call them, you know, the treatment professionals and those who understand these things. Call them co-occurring disorders, two things happening at the same time, and they're often a lot more. But so that's the background. That's where we are in this country today. By the way, that's where we've been for the last 20 years. We haven't had our eyes open, as far as I'm concerned, but that's where we are now. Why haven't we looked at this differently? Well, you have to understand, and I think all of you do who have been in the court system, that you know the way the courts work. What do judges do? We punish people, right? That's what we do. And if you've ever been in a court or a defendant in a case, I will tell you what really goes on if you haven't been. It's always a question of time. It's like a math problem, okay? The defendant wants 0. The district attorney wants 100. Probation wants 85. And the judge is in the middle. And what do many judges end up doing? The math. So somewhere between 100 and 0, you come out and that's the sentence. And if you follow me, and there are all sorts of things we have to look at, mitigating factors, aggravating factors, do you have a prior criminal record? There are all sorts of ways to do the math. But it comes down to math. And when you do more and more people, it goes faster and faster, and then pretty soon it can become totally math. And in some courts it is totally math. And people end up with a lot of punishment. Okay. And so that's the way the system's run, and in many states to this day, that's the way it's run. And what do we know about punishment? Why do we do these things? You say, well, this is kind of stupid, isn't it? Just to make sentencing a math problem and look at a bunch of factors that are supposed to help you figure out the math? Well, we really believe, and this is the thing that worries me more than anything else, that punishment changes people, okay? And it does, by the way, it does for some offenders. Oh, absolutely it does. Will it ever go away? Never. Because we have victims. You know, we have people that get hurt. Society won't tolerate a world in which there's no punishment at the present time. You know, there has to be accountability. But the problem has been that when we spend all of our efforts as judges on this issue of punishment, and we actually come to believe that we'll change everyone, it gets all screwed up. Because we have learned some basic lessons. Number one, our jails today are all at capacity in California. Our jail in Santa Clara County, which I believe is still the 13th or 14th largest in the United States, it's in the top 20, is already back to capacity, all right, with the change in the laws. Okay? Well, we have the jails at the capacity. Once a jail is full, and we're stopped now, judges can't send anyone to prison anymore, can't send anyone except serious and violent offenders and sex offenders. So the large number of people are not going to be sent to prison. If there's no more room in the jail, people get released. Okay? Does that help anyone? No. No one gets better. You see, incarceration really does not help anyone get better. It really doesn't. If we know that, and we do, then why do we keep doing it? Well, because it's something that I could tell you about drug addiction, and I will. There's a very good reason for that. But before we get there, I want to show you something else. And that is what happens to people when we let them out of jail. Well, we put them on supervision. And how do people do on supervision? Well, if they're addicted to drugs, they do terribly. And if they're mentally ill, they do terribly. So what happens to them? Remember, punishment. If that's the goal, they go back to prison. They go back to jail again and again and again and again. And the net result is we're getting nowhere, okay? With people who use drugs and those who are mentally ill. We're not going to get anywhere doing this. So let me tell you briefly my own personal journey. How did I get to where I am today? Very simply, I was in that mode. I've been a judge for over 30 years. Just so going to start a new term. I've been reelected. So long ago. But when I started as a judge, I was into this punishment because that's all we did. And I saw people going to jail again and again, and I saw people that I was sending to prison, and all of a sudden, I saw people coming back. I'd say you don't give them too much time, and so you give them 90 days, and they're back right away. And then again and again, and then pretty soon there are 5 of them. But what we do in punishment is add a little more each time you screw up, right? You new case, well, so I started to doing my own math, and I said, these people should be sent to prison for 100 years, right? Because they keep coming back so fast. Then I saw their brothers come back and their sisters, and then it's their mother, and if you wait long enough, it'll be their kids. And I said to myself, this is insanity, like those of you in ANNA, you know about insanity, doing the same thing again and again, and you always get the same result even though you think you'll get a different one. And that's what we were doing. And we continue this day often to do this. And so I said, no, that's got to change. Well, change, and I'm going to talk more about this in terms of recovery and those who are addicted to drugs and mentally ill. Change is really hard. It's very hard for judges. That's why when you ask me, well, how do you get to where you are? How can I have the largest mental health court in the world or the United States? It's years and years and years of battles of fighting for it. And that's because change is so hard to make happen. Whether it's in your own life or in somebody else's, and trying to change the courts is one of the most difficult things in the world. Not as difficult as stopping using drugs. Not as difficult at all, but it is very difficult to do. So I set out to do that. It took over 20 years, and I'm still doing it. To this day, I'm still doing it. And it is not easy. But if you want to know what really drives me, and I'm just talking personally, I believe in people. I don't believe, and I say this every day, no, I don't think anyone in the courtroom believes me, but I do not believe in failure. I believe that things are going to change if I give persons enough opportunities, and if they come to think that they can change and then start doing it. And I believe that people can get better. And because I believe that, I keep doing what I do. And other judges don't agree with me, I've been called a social worker. A lot of out of jail card. I get all of these titles. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's my battle. Everybody has their own battle. But change is difficult. But if you don't believe in people, judges are not going to do these things. So the basic change that has to take place in a judge is you have to look as an individual, as a person, not as just one more defendant or one more parolee, but as a person. And then you will begin to understand their struggles, and then you will begin to see that if you continue to have hope in them and believe in them, that they may change. It may not be in your lifetime, but it will start. All right, so now I want to talk about the challenges that we all have, and this applies to judges as well. But this is a challenge in society. One is stigma. The second one I've already talked about, our total focus on punishment, and the failure to understand the power of treatment and recovery. These are the biggest challenges for judges. Now you'd say, wait a minute, judges are supposed to be fair. That's our job. But that is not necessarily true when it comes to stigma. So let's talk about stigma. What is stigma? In my view, stigma is the moral view. That means if we were in a church building, I guess, if we were in church, it is what is good, what is evil, what is sin, and what is not sin. And drug addiction, being on parole, being mentally ill, if these all become sins and bad things and evil, then we make a moral judgment that this is something that needs to be punished, right? Because it's evil. And that's what stigma's really all about, in my view. It leads to people not being accepted in the community and not doing well in court. How do we show the mentally ill in our media? Now there's a change going on. You'll see mentally ill people standing up and speaking. You saw the death of Robin Williams. No one knew. Why didn't anyone know? Why wasn't anything being, what was going on? We'll never know, I guess. But this is one of the things that drives us to never recognize that people are mentally ill and to hide from it.